So, Tom, s'il vous plaît, check ça. This is, I'm going to start using these just to upset the premier. This is Jagmeet Singh talking about David Johnston's appointment as the
Yeah,
rapporteur. Now,
yeah.
all the opposition, so Pierre Poilievre obviously came out against this. We played a clip of Yves-François Blanchet against this. Here's Jagmeet Singh.
What has become really clear is in this whole very serious matter of foreign interference that the other opposition parties, and frankly the Liberals as well, have been more focused on scoring political points than really focused on solutions around protecting our democracy. And that's why we've been calling for an independent process. And while we still maintain we need a public inquiry to restore public confidence, to respond to the concerns that Canadians have.
There's a pretty good deflection right there in weighing in, I guess, on David Johnston by talking about everything else and still saying we need a public inquiry. From everything you've heard today, you surprised by any of the reaction?
Well, I think we have to nuance a little bit what Blanchet said because he was quite nice with regard to David Johnston, the person, but he also pivoted to saying, "But look, this is just a diversion. It's a stalling tactic by Trudeau. We will have, Aaron, a full commission of inquiry." Where Trudeau won part of his gambit yesterday was in naming David Johnston. He all of a sudden gave his approach far more credibility than it had up until now, because up until now, we had this bizarre title that he had invented, Special Rapporteur, which is something borrowed from the diplomatic world and had nothing whatsoever to do with the work that had to be done here. And so his thesis now is, look, I've asked this guy to come up with terms of reference, let us know whether he thinks a commission of inquiry is actually required, that sort of thing. If you go back to the history of this, when David Johnston did something very similar for Stephen Harper, he essentially looked at the whole Mulroney, Airbus, Karl-Heinz Schreiber mess and said, I'm hiving off this part, and he called it well-tilled soil. He just said, we're just leaving that on the side. We're going to give the judge, and his name was Judge Oliphant, who had been named by Mulroney. Nobody was going to say that he was against Mulroney. And he looked at all of this and he said, look, we're going to just look at the part that's important for the country, for Canada, what happened between Mulroney and this guy Schreiber. And it was a pretty tough report, but he didn't rehash all the stuff around Airbus. I'm expecting the same thing from David Johnston here. He'll take it up to 35,000 feet. He'll say, yes, the Conservatives want to have a food fight with Trudeau about what his chief of staff, Katie Telford, knew and when she knew it. That's the type of stuff that he doesn't care about. He's our former head of state. He was the Queen's representative here. He's held all of these highest posts. He knows what an intelligence assessment is. He doesn't have to be told. He knows the importance of protecting the sources and the techniques of our intelligence operatives. He's not going to give any of that away in what he says or what he will allow when he suggests a public inquiry. But I'm convinced that David Johnston, taking the full measure of this, will come down hard in favor of defending our democratic institutions. He's not going to let the inquiry get into the weeds about the Liberals specifically. It's not going to be partisan, but he will stand strongly, in my view, in favor of the defense of Canadian institutions.
Can I ask a question, Tom, with respect to this filibustering that's been happening, right,
Yes.
by the Liberals to prevent Katie Telford from, in fact, testifying? Can they at some point be compelled to force her to testify?
No, I mean, if she were to refuse an eventual meeting with the committee and the committee were able to hold its meetings, yes. Is this the type of thing that might be saved by the eventual report of the Special Rapporteur, David Johnston? Perhaps. It is, for me, for my money, it's a pretty serious indication that the Liberals have something very important to hide. The fact that, usually filibusters are done by whom? By opposition parties, because they don't want the government pushing through part of its agenda,
Right.
piece of its legislation. Here, it's a bit bizarre because the government is filibustering the opposition, then not letting things happen. But I guess that's a part and parcel of a minority government.
Tom, can you walk us through why some are balking at this appointment and saying that David Johnston is a friend of Trudeau's, that it's kind of an in-the-family arrangement?
Yeah, well, the reason that they're trying to say that, and I'm very insistent on the need for an inquiry, and I'm always very skeptical myself, but here I am all in defense of David Johnston. He sat as a board member, as a volunteer at the Trudeau Foundation that provides scholarships to students, and they've done great work. the big difference between David Johnston and Michael Rosenberg, who did the report about the report. So Johnston's going to do the determination. He's the inquiry into the inquiry. The other guy did the report about the report. So we had 3 senior civil servants who all worked for Trudeau. And then Trudeau says, well, I'm going to have their work reviewed. This is going to be part of my transparent process. I'll have their work reviewed by a totally independent, respected person, Michael Rosenberg. The problem was Rosenberg was actually the president and CEO for years of the Trudeau Foundation. So it's not at all the same case as Johnston. There are any number of people on the board there. They have no political coloring. They have no favoritism. Nobody who knows anything about Johnston and his incredible service to Canada would ever point an accusing finger about him. Of course, I'm forgetting about Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing, I know this is not on our list, but I'm just seeing this now. Philip Fournier just posting about the new Leger poll, asking Canadians, and the question is, in your opinion, which federal party leader would make the best prime minister of Canada? So nationally, 24% Justin Trudeau, 19% Pierre Poilievre, 18% Jagmeet Singh, which kind of made me go, what? I would have thought that it was not that close between second and third. Is that surprising to you?
No, because Singh's number is exactly spot on with the NDP's polling number. So he's got his base, and everybody says, obviously, our guy's the best for prime minister. What's interesting is you've got that poll, and you've also got another Angus Reid poll that came out today. And in all of those polls, you'll see that the Conservatives are ahead of the Liberals as a voting option. But in every single one of those polls, the off-putting character of Pierre Poilievre plays in, and Trudeau is immensely more popular, statistically, than Poilievre. This is why I think that Trudeau is doing his best to try to hang on. He wants to have this battle of the ages against Pierre Poilievre, and I think it might be handed to him because he's the one who decides the date of the next election. I was talking with somebody from the NDP today and said, Jagmeet's not in any hurry to bring down the government. I said, he's not the one who's going to decide the date of the next election. It's Trudeau who decides the date of the next election. All he has to do is walk across the lawn and go see Mary Simon at Rideau Hall and say, I need a writ. I want an election, and she has to give it to him. And by the way, even if the NDP decided on a point of principle, let's say a budgetary principle, to vote against Trudeau, guess what? The Bloc's going to prop them up. The Bloc's not in any hurry to go to an election either. They don't have a lot of money to spend, and they got a great result last time around. They don't want to put that in jeopardy.
By the way, in that same survey, this is a fascinating number. They break it down provincially as well. So in Quebec, listen to this. Trudeau's at 22%. Yeah. Number 2 at 18%. None of the above.
My favorite.
Wait, it gets better. It gets better. Jagmeet Singh at 14%. Dead last, Pierre Poilievre at 10%.
Yeah. Because if you find him off-putting in English, his French, his French is not bad. Okay, you have to give him that, and he's clearly working on it because it was extremely, it was like immersion French. It was like missing a bunch of words and stuff because he'd spent his whole life in English. But what's interesting about Poilievre is that none of it translates. Like even he tends to translate his lines verbatim, and he doesn't have similar imagery to use it when he's speaking in French. It comes across completely bockety. It doesn't work. It doesn't connect or communicate. And I think that I think they're at 9 seats right now in Quebec, maybe 10. But I think that every single one of those seats is in jeopardy in the upcoming election.
Tom, if you're Trudeau right now, do you want to call an election sooner than later to kind of, ride this wave and get ahead of Pierre Poilievre, or do you want to let him sink himself as things go on?
Well, he's trying to keep his options open. My thinking is still that he's looking at October as his best option. The new electoral map will have come into force, and very soon. And after that, he's got 7 months to call an election under the old map, which is a lot more favorable to Liberals than the new map will be. The new map, for example, adds a whole bunch of new seats in Alberta, and guess what? They're all going to the Conservatives. So Trudeau will have to try to avoid that. He's got other priorities, like making sure that the Commission of Inquiry that will eventually be called doesn't have time to hear a single witness or do anything, but it would still allow Trudeau to say, hey, you wanted a Commission of Inquiry, just let the Commission start. I've already given it its mandate. state and all its money, and they're going to be able to start looking into this. So he's got to make sure that none of that interferes with his election prospects. He's got things as nuts and bolts as the 6 months or so until there has to be a by-election in NDG Westmount. And if you talk to anybody in the English-speaking community, there's so many people upset about Trudeau's Bill C-13, they just might cause a bit of a surprise because, as we learned earlier this week, by-elections are always an opportunity to send a message. Mm-hmm. So I think that for a whole bunch of reasons, it's lining up for an October-ish election for Trudeau. By the way, one of the tiny telltale signs, Chrystia Freeland, of course, who's been in the green room waiting for her turn on stage, to become the first Liberal Prime Minister of Canada, and the only party to have never had a woman as a leader. Of the 5 parties in the House of Commons, the only one that's never had a woman leader, the Liberals, even though they talk a good game on women's rights. So Chrystia Freeland, of course, is by far the most competent and capable person in Trudeau's cabinet. She's getting fed up, I think, for whatever expressed or implied deal she might have thought she had with Trudeau, because he's, for now, not taking his walk in the snow, and the snow's going to be gone in a while. So I think that the fact that she's musing again openly, it's back in the news that she might go and take over as the Secretary General of NATO. She'd be an interesting fit there. That's a sign that Trudeau's planning to stick around, even though a lot of the senior people that I know in the Liberal Party are trying to give him very nice hints that he's done such an amazing job in this last mandate that it should actually be his last mandate.
Last thing before we go, Tom, you brought up the NDG Westmount. There was going to be a by-election, obviously, to replace Marc Garneau. You have any inkling of what might be happening there? Any names that you've heard or hearing?
No, I mean, the NDP put out papers like within 5 minutes of his announcement saying, well, okay, now it's time to come and vote for us. We had one relatively close run, and it was in the by-election that was rolled into the general when Marc Garneau won, and the NDP had Anne Lagacé-Dowson, and then in the famous Orange Wave of 2011, something very similar happened. He'd conceded that he had lost, but it wasn't to be because the Liberals had the advanced polls already in the ballot box. But no, I think that Trudeau's just going to put that in the mix of the 3 or 4 things that he's using to play the clock between now and the election.
All right. Tom Mulcair back tomorrow morning with Andrew Carter at 7:40. Thank you, Tom.